Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? I hope you're all having a good day this far. Today, we're actually going to talk about ethics. All right. Excuse me. So, in your chapter, we're going to read about sort of the ethics of public speaking and how it's important. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, it's giving a speech. What does ethics have to do with speech? And when you think about what ethics is, ethics sort of rolls around the ideas of what's right and wrong and why we decide to do things, and sort of the right and wrongs of giving a speech, both in the process and the reasoning behind it. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move along. So, the importance of ethics. Now, ethics is a branch of philosophy that deals with issues of right or wrong in human affairs. And a lot of us sort of remember ethics. People say sometimes it's the feeling in the gut of your stomach when you know you're doing something wrong, or it's sort of having a bad person and a good person on either shoulder telling you, no, 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 do this, or no, 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 do that, right? And so the idea here is the idea of what's right and what's wrong. Okay, now an ethical decision is it says south, I'm sorry, that's supposed to be sound. Sound ethical decisions involve weighing a potential course of action against a set of ethical standards or guidelines. So when you make an ethical decision, you're basing that on a rule or a guideline that you believe to be ethical, right? And we face those things almost on an everyday basis, and sometimes they seem like very minor and sometimes they seem very big. For example, think of a situation where if either your son, your daughter, your nephew, your niece, your little brother, your little sister, whoever, they're 3, 4 years old, and they come to you and they say, "Is Santa real?" Ooh, what do you say? Now, some of you may say, "No, he's not real. He's real in your heart, but he's not a real person," because in your mind, the guideline is you don't lie to your family, right? On the other hand, you might say, "Oh yes, he is," because even though you're lying, your ethical guideline is, why we want to break or sort of break the heart of a young child, right? Why are we going to take away their fantasy? And so, it's wrong of me, or it's not my role, right? I'm not their parent. And so again, those you have ethics that involves right and wrong, then you have the ethical decision making, which is your reasoning between for making that decision. Now, some of the guidelines for making an ethical decision is making sure that your goals are ethically sound. What is it that you're trying to do with your speech? Are you trying to help someone? Are you trying to alleviate pain? Are you trying to inform someone for their good? Right? You want to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, first and foremost. Okay? The next one is be fully prepared for each speech. Now, that's sort of an interesting one when you really think about it, because really you should be ready for the speech no matter whether it's ethical or not. So, what does it have to do with ethics? Well, think about this. Imagine you went to go see a speaker. You went to Comic Con or a BTS event where you get to see your favorite pop stars or whatever. You go to this function where one of your favorite actors, actresses, authors, whomever is going to speak. And then when they get there, they start talking, and you're thinking to yourself, man, this person was not ready to speak. They're talking gibberish. Their things doesn't make sense. You could just tell that they're not ready to speak. How does that make you feel? As an audience member, how does it make you feel that the person that you took your time and effort to go see is not ready to talk to you? And for most people, and I'm not saying all, but for most people, it makes them feel less. It makes them feel like that person, the public speaker, didn't take the time to think of me as the audience member enough to prepare, right? They think less of me to do that. I'm not worth it. And that's why being prepared is important, because you're showing respect to the audience members who came to hear you speak. Now, the other thing too is you want to be honest in what you say. That kind of goes without saying, right? You're not going to go up there and throw lies. At least you're not supposed to, right? So when you are publicly speaking, the first thing you have to kind of consider is be truthful. Be honest in what you say. It's important to know that the information that you're giving comes from not just a good place, but a factual place. The other thing that you want to consider is avoid name calling and other forms of abusive language. You want to make sure that when you are speaking to someone, that you don't use language that to defame, demean, or degrade individuals in the groups. That's just kind of common sense there. Because the minute you start using derogatory language, at that moment in time, you could possibly lose members of that audience. And the next thing we have here is the Bill of Rights. Now, why is the Bill of Rights? These are the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. Why is that important? And that's important because you want to make sure you understand what your rights are as someone who is publicly speaking, and understand what the rights are of those who are listening to you. And just as much as you have a right to your thoughts and your ideas, they have a right to their thoughts and their ideas. And it's important to understand what our rights are. Okay? You want to make sure you put those ethical principles into practice. You want to make sure that, as you know, it's not just, okay, I know I shouldn't lie, it's don't lie. Make sure that as you're speaking to someone, as you're speaking not just to someone, but as you're speaking to a group of people, that you don't use name calling, that you don't lie, that you don't do the things that are negative, because that's not being an ethical speaker. Okay? And the question I ask here is, do you ever see or hear a time when these principles were not in practice? And when they weren't, how did that make you feel? What did it make you think about that public speaker? And we can all sort of think of ideas of where we saw this person sort of say things that were untrue or maybe borderline true. And how did that make you feel about that person? No, it's interesting to sort of understand that. And it's also interesting to note that when you see someone, the audience is made up of a lot of different people. So therefore, the truth of one person isn't always the truth of another person. That's always something to consider too. Okay? Now, one of the other things that we have to consider is plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is presenting another person's language or ideas as one's own. In short, it's copy pasting somebody else's work and putting it as submitting it and putting it on paper and submitting it as it was yours. That's actually going online, copying a piece of paper, saying, "Ooh, I need to write a paper about, the economy or about recycling." And so you find one online, you copy it, you paste it on a Word document, you put your name on it, you turn it in. That's called plagiarism, and that's unethical. It's wrong. And people have done it, and they've gotten caught, and I've caught them, and people have gotten an F on an assignment. People have gotten an F on the course. People have actually been expelled from the campus because plagiarism is taken very important here. It's an important issue for the campus. And you have to be careful about that because people have been caught, and there is an organization on campus, a committee that deals with those issues. And if you do plagiarize, people will report you. Instructors will report you to that organization. Okay? Now, there's three types of plagiarism. The first one is global plagiarism, and that's kind of like the idea that I said a little bit earlier, which is stealing a speech entirely from a single source and passing it off on one's own. That means, like I said earlier, finding a paper that's written, copying it, and then putting your name on it, and then turning it in. That's global because you copied the whole thing. The next one is called patchwork plagiarism. And here, what you're trying to do is you're actually taking um, bits and pieces from different sources, right? You find a piece of paper here, another paper there, another essay there, and you put them all together, and you create an assignment that isn't your own, but it isn't from one source. It's from all these different sources. Okay, that's also plagiarism. All right. The next thing that you have is called incremental plagiarism. And this is where a lot of students, especially freshmen, sophomores, they sort of fall into this because they're not used to citing sources and using quotation marks. And what they do is they fail to give credit for particular parts of a speech that are borrowed from other people. So what happens is that as you're giving a speech, or even when you write a paper, you'll cite a statistic. You'll say 85% of the population believes in ghosts. And you say, okay, great. Uh, According to who? According did you do some sort of survey? If so, how did you conduct it? How many people did you survey? Does that make sense? Did you get it from a newspaper? Did you get it from an article? How old is it? And so it's important for you to say, according to the International Journal of Ghosts, they conducted a study of 1,000 people throughout the United States that stated that about 85% of the population believe in ghosts. This was done on the journal of 1999 or 2010, right? Whatever the source is. And so the idea here is you want to say where you got that information from and know that it's yours. And a lot of times you want to say things like according to, based on, from the reading. Or if you're going to quote someone word for word, you want to use quotation marks. And if you're going to quote an exact wording, you want to make sure you put the quotation marks on each side so that the reader knows that, oh, okay, this is not you saying it. Now, in a speech, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, is you're going to have what's called an abbreviated outline and a full length outline. Now, in the abbreviated outline, you're only supposed to use keywords, but when it comes to a quote, you are going to use the entire quote. And that may not make sense to you right now, but it will as we sort of move forward. Okay? Now, the other thing too here is that some people do is they restate or summarize an author's idea in one's own words. And what that means is that you basically reworded the information with your own words and you just turned it in like that. But the idea isn't yours. The idea is theirs. Even though it's your words, it's their idea and you still have to give them credit. And one of the things that it talks about here is plagiarism and the internet is that especially with all the information that you have access to, you are very tempted to go out there and to grab information and just kind of do a shortcut and copy paste and turn it in. And that just isn't right. You have to make sure you stand by your ethics and your moral standards and don't copy and paste. Okay? Now, some of the guidelines for ethical listening, this is where we get to ethical listening from the audience point of view, is A, be courteous and attentive. You know, one of the most difficult things about being a public speaker is when you go up on the stage or in front of the class or in front of your peers, wherever it is, and then you're talking and you're giving your speech, and all of a sudden you're looking at people and they're looking at their phones, they're falling asleep, they're looking down out the window. As a speaker, that makes you feel bad. It makes you feel like you're not important, like you're boring. And that is not very helpful to you as a speaker. And so as an audience member, we want to support the speaker. We want to support those who are talking to us by giving them our attention, by paying attention, by being courteous, by nodding our head, by raising our hand, by answering the question. If they say yes, say yes. If they ask yes or no, raise your hand. Participate, right? The next thing you want to do is you want to avoid prejudging the speaker. Before the speaker even says a word, you don't want to necessarily already judge them based on their ideas, how they look, or anything like that. You have to be open to ideas, right? You can't know someone, you can't understand someone without listening to them first. So you have to avoid prejudging them. You don't want to have any bias. You definitely don't want to have any stereotypes. You want to maintain the free and open expression of ideas. You want to allow that other person to express what ideas that they want to share because you never know. Even though you may disagree with them at the start, they may actually present to you some information that you were unfamiliar with that you might be like, huh, I didn't know that. That makes sense. And that's happened. I've had students in my class who, whether it was euthanasia, whether it was gun control, whether it was any basic issues, is that they came into the class and they listened and they had their position, and all of a sudden they heard some information from one of their peers in the speech that they gave, and they're like, "Wow, I never thought of it that way." Hmm. And then it doesn't necessarily mean that their position went from here to here. It just, maybe slightly changed a little bit. And that's all we want. As a critical listener, we want to make sure that we understand and we're open to the ideas that are being shared to us. With that said, how do you rate yourself as an ethical listener? Are you the type of person who is closed-minded and doesn't want to hear anything when people are saying things that you don't agree with, or are you open to listening? Understand, open to listening, not changing your mind, not taking up, not giving up your morals or ethics. No, just are you open to listening? At the end of the day, you may still disagree, but it's a hard position to be in when people cannot communicate with each other. Okay. Now, what were some of the things that you have seen in others who are not listening ethically? What happens when you're trying to convince someone of something and that person is like, no, 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 I don't want to, I don't want to listen to this. How does that make you feel? How does that make them look? And when we understand that, then we have to understand, why is it so important? Why is it so important to be not just an ethical listener, but also an ethical speaker? And you have to sort of pull it all together. Okay. All right. So, as always, I hope you're having a great day thus far. You are always welcome to email me, ask me any questions you may have. You're always also welcome to email me, either to ask me questions or to ask, say, hey, Mr. G, can we have a Zoom meeting? And I'll be happy to have a Zoom meeting with you. Okay. All right, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Please take care, and I'll be talking to you soon. Bye bye.